reality is all these deals have risk. If it's especially the classic like value add, like if you want everything to be green and everything to be good, then stick with the treasury bond or a money market or something like that's not. There's a risk premium to get this sort of return. You need to take on a little bit of risk, but I feel like that wasn't elucidated to some of the limited partners, and they had this false sense of like it's your responsibility to take care of my money. Whereas something like this could have opened their eyes a little bit, so that it shielded sponsors to let them know, like, listen, this is the investor's responsibility too, to do some of their own education and due diligence, which in the past they were just throwing money at people and not really thinking about that. So I think it'll help the sponsors in that sense too, to add some awareness of that risk component of some of these deals.
You're listening to the Accredited Investors Only podcast, presented by Accredited Life.
Sam, welcome to the show. How you feeling today?
I'm feeling excellent. Thanks for having me, Peter. I really appreciate it.
Hey, thanks for being here. So let's start with introduction. Sam, who are you? What are you doing? Why are you here? All that good stuff.
All right, sounds good. Yeah, so my name's Sam Giordano. I'm a practicing gastroenterologist. I don't have to say that more than 3 times in a row. But basically, GI doc. I live in New Jersey. I've been practicing for going on 13 years now. So I've been out of training since then. And yeah, so, I've always been pretty sort of familiar with personal finance. I teach personal finance to a lot of the fellows and residents in training, as well as other attendings, which are the full-fledged docs. I have about 700 other docs at my hospital, so there's a bunch of us. So, the first couple years out of training, I learned a lot from white coat investor Jim Dolly about personal finance through, maxing out your retirement accounts, starting up your kids' 529s, paying off student loans, paying off any consumer debt, credit card debt. So his mantra is like live like a resident, meaning like kind of try not to inflate your lifestyle till you can get some of that stuff in place, which I teach and I think is huge and I really believe in. So once you get to that point, if you do it right, that's usually around 5 to 7 years out of training. And at that point in time, you certainly can start contributing to like taxable post-tax brokerage accounts and retirement accounts if you feel like you need to. But also you realize, as your income starts to kick up, that you start to, develop a good problem, like a tax problem. And so that's when I started to explore ways to diversify my income. That's sort of less tax advantaged income. So I was looking into real estate more so, and looking into active investing at that point in time. I dabbled in thinking about like turnkey investments and like a quadplex or a triplex. And then I came upon real estate syndications in 2017 as a passive investor, which I do, and it's not for everybody, but I think for practicing physicians that don't necessarily want like another day job, it's sort of a good fit. But the key is sort of doing some due diligence up front, making sure you learn the parameters, because a lot of these passive syndication investments have very high minimums, 25,000, 50,000. I mean, there's some crowdfunding platforms where you can, get in at a lower entry point, but due to those high minimums, you got to make sure you're sort of educating yourself. And I spent the whole year prior to investing, educating myself, figuring out what the key metrics were, how do I vet these deals. Once you give them your money, it's kind of gone. So that's sort of the long and short of it is. And to this day, I've now invested in I think 28 passive syndication investments. So I've sort of diversified across different sort of spaces, multifamily, other asset classes, mobile home, self-storage. So yeah, that's pretty much my story.
You tipped the award for the best introduction I've ever had on the show. I mean, you covered the gambit there. You didn't leave anything out. You make my job easy because there's so much to unpack there. Was the personal finance thing, like, what was that just kind of naturally, was it built into you? Like, were your parents that way or something? Or are a lot of doctors keyed in on that, or are they just thinking, I'm going to be making money? It doesn't, does that resonate with people, or like, and where did it come from with you?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, Peter. So yes, it was something that I was interested in naturally. I come from there's no other physicians in my family, so I'm sort of the black sheep in that sense. So my dad was always he was the police officer, and then he always had sort of side businesses, a pizza business and other stuff. So business was always his thing. So he kind of imparted that part onto me and my siblings. So I always had an interest in personal finance. I was always curious about it. To answer your second question, unfortunately, not a lot of physicians have that same interest. So it's all about keeping it as simple as possible for them. Try to not overly complicate it. Now, I was someone who, way back in the day, I was, in addition to Jim Daly, a white coat investor, like Ramit Sethi has a great book, I Will Teach You to Be Rich. The Automatic Millionaire is a great book. J.D. Collins has A Simple Path to Wealth, has a great book. So I was just absorbing as much of these things as I could. And it's sort of an inflection point where you start to get some redundancy, but in a good way, in that everyone's saying similar things, that, you can kind of put your own take on it. But yeah, I had a huge interest in the personal finance, and I'm passionate about it in a way that, after COVID, I mean, it's always been important for physicians, but after COVID, there's been a huge sort of uptick in physician burnout. To where, it was just obviously a stressful time for everybody, but for physicians and other people on the front lines. And so I feel like these days, over the last couple of years, more and more physicians have become focused, in addition to obviously, setting themselves up financially, but also quality of life issues, to where, thankfully I've been able to cut down to 4 days a week with this passive income from my other real estate investments. And I'm passionate about allowing other physicians and high income professionals get to that point to where, well, even if they don't want to do sort of a side business, if they just want to spend more time with their friends and family, I think it's hugely valuable to everyone. So yeah, that's where I started the teaching and trying to get people aware of some of these other sort of mechanisms to kind of set yourself up.
Yeah, that's sometimes you have to see the results in other people's lives in order to realize like this is what's possible. It's kind of upfront in the thinking of it or the theories of it and what it could lead to. It's if you don't see an example in your personal life, it can be difficult. And it sounds like you're living that example. So they're very lucky to have somebody like you, who's actually doing it so they can see the results that you're getting. Now, when you do the educational side, what are some of those foundational things that they need to do? Because I'm assuming some people might get super, excited about the possibilities in syndication, and if they're accredited, the all the opportunities that they have available to them. But it sounds like you've done a really good job at kind of at first building a solid foundation to work off of. So, what are some of those non-negotiables? What are some of those things they have to do foundationally?
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And I try to do it in a way, because not everyone has the same interest that like we do or I do in the personal finance component. So I try to keep it as simplistic as possible. And then, I feel like the first key is like paying off any of that high interest consumer debt, like whether it's credit cards or auto loans or stuff like that, or not to get into it in the first place, but if you are into it, then figuring out a plan to pay off those highest interest things. Now, you have certain people like Dave Ramsey and other people that sort of recommends paying off the smallest sort of loan. If you have multiple of these, smallest ones first, but I'm more of a proponent to look at the highest interest just from a math standpoint and try to get that paid off first. So to me, that's the first thing to do. And then the second thing to do is, you can't rely, like, finance is as much behavioral as it is sort of mechanistic, in that you can't rely on yourself to be as diligent. So the key to me is automating these things. And thankfully these days, for those of us who work in a W-2 job, or even if it's not a W-2 job, oftentimes if you can sort of set these direct debits or direct sort of investments from your paycheck to certain accounts. So I know for my hospital, we can go and allocate it up to like 8 different accounts. So you set up your pre-tax retirement accounts, maximize, whether it be a 401k, 403b, and then also, you can then set it into, say you're saving for a house down payment or a car. and you can allocate it into, I use high interest savings accounts for those other allocations that I'm saving things for. Like, now you can get 4 to 5% on some of those. So you're at least getting some interest around that. And then I have a sort of another component that goes to my taxable brokerage account. And then I then set that on automatic investing, X, whatever your comfort level is, X amount a month into a couple different, I'm a big fan of index fund investing. So a couple different, like not too complicated, total market fund, total market XUX, maybe a tax-free muni bond fund, just because I don't want to kick up any of my taxable income. So then once you get that foundation set up, like and in the real estate space, I find that it's polarizing in that you have some people that are usually either fully on one side or the other, meaning they're all stock market or asset, that sort of investing, or they're all real estate. Where I'm more of I feel like there's value to the hybrid approach in that, if you look at it, you can kind of have the foundation like we're talking about, and it's not that much work to get that in place. And then once you have that in place, that's when you kind of dabble into the real estate stuff. And I think looking back the last couple of years where the stock market, has been, I thought it was overvalued 3 years ago and it kept going up. So, and then you look at the real estate space, especially in passive investing and multifamily investments where a lot of variable rate debt was used and interest rate, obviously nobody could have predicted the craziness of the interest rate hikes. So some of those deals are having a little distress or pause distributions or even some capital calls. So if you look just back at that time frame, and obviously you can do that with any time frame, but you can see there was value to having some foundation in the stocks to where you weren't all the way in the real estate space. But I'm not a big fan of like picking individual stocks or Tesla or Apple. I'm more of the set it and forget it. I try to take the mental and the behavioral part out of it, so it makes it easier,
Sure. No, I love that. That's all great advice, and I love the automating a certain task and things like that. And I'm sure that resonates well with people who are very, very busy. They have a high-powered full-time job plus the family and the kids and your life beyond that as well. So I'm sure that connects well, and it takes some of the pressure off too. I mean, to think you got to do all these things if certain things can be automated, then that's amazing. I love too what you're saying about it's kind of like a do this then do that approach, which makes it more graspable and just maybe less intimidating, and also like making those pre-tax retirement type of investments and all before maybe hopping into certain things on like the syndication side that could potentially increase your ordinary income, which at a certain point in your career, that would make more sense. Like you said, if you want to start to, work less and have more passive income to supplement it. But as you said, you kind of have to get that retirement side taken care of sooner than later. And then ideally let it compound for a longer period of time, right?
Absolutely. 100%. Yeah. Like when you look back at one of the other sort of things that is the traditional personal finance approach, you hear about the 4% rule. Meaning that when you're looking at sort of how much you need to save for retirement, traditionally when used in like equities or stock market investing, if you apply the 4% rule, say you need for every $40,000 you need in your retirement income, you would need to save $1 million. So say you wanted 120,000 of retirement income, you'd need to save $3 million. And the theory is if you withdraw at that point in time, as long as you stay within that 4%, that you shouldn't run out of your retirement income. So, but you think about that 3 million number, if that's what your expenses are, then it can be daunting to think about it that way. So the cool thing, and sort of what allowed me to kind of cut down a little earlier was that if you sort of then combine, say, a 4% rule for some of your income, but also then kicking in some passive investments that eventually get $5, $6, $7, $10,000 a month of income. Now you don't really need to save that, and it makes it more approachable. So instead of it taking, say, a 20, 25-year career to get to that $3 million number, you may be able to get to that sort of financial independence number 10, 15 years out if you do it right. So that's where I think the value comes in when you use this hybrid or combined approach of the two. to really give you some options to where you can then decide what's right for you.
I love it. It makes a lot of sense. Let's talk about taxes. Was that the catalyst you said that kind of brought you into the real estate world, or I gotta assume that's such an important part for anybody with high W-2. So how explain to me and the audience what the power is there. I mean, what's attractive about it? What can it do? All that kind of stuff.
Yeah, so it was, to answer your question. So the sort of the thing that was the catalyst back in 2017, which is when I started getting exposed to this real estate syndication investing, was at the time they enacted the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. Um, that, living in a high tax state like New Jersey, we basically lost the ability to deduct the SALT deduction, so the state and local taxes. So for me, that was a huge, I wasn't as privy all to the nuances. Not that I'm like a CPA, knowledge base, but I wasn't as privy to the nuances of what went into how much I paid in taxes until that hit, because it was hard to anticipate like what kind of effect that was going to have until I got the tax bill and it hit me right in the face, and I was like, "Oof, that hurts." And so I've never had to come up with that much cash just to pay taxes. So I mean, listen, I'm not complaining. It's a great problem to have. But when you see that, it makes you think, like, are there ways that what can I do? Because, both my wife and I are physicians. We both are W-2 employees. So there's only so much that we can do. But I wanted to figure out a way to diversify my income. And that really is what allowed me to start looking into, I was looking at other things too. I mean, there's some esoteric stuff where back then it was a little more acceptable, whereas now it's kind of got a black eye, like conservation easements, as well as like oil and gas investments. And some people still partake in that stuff. Not to say no, it's not right for everybody, but there's additional risk variables and other things you need to kind of vet about that as far as W-2 employees goes. But for me, the real estate space has been around forever. A ton of wealth is built through real estate, so it was more approachable. It seemed more sort of foundational. And then it was just about sort of, me being the OCD sort of person which I think is good for physicians to have. I kind of spent that whole first year like learning about syndications, really realizing some of the tax benefits. So it's not as if, unless you qualify without getting too far in the weeds as like a real estate professional, to where you're actively owned, you can't do it just as a passive investor. So you have to have some active investments, or you or your spouse have to then be managing those actively to qualify for the parameters that fit you in that loop. Then you could offset some of your active income. Whereas if you're not, then the value of it is that oftentimes, in the past, there was, say, what they call 100 depreciation, where you would take the loss on the property and then you could offset any passive income. So passive income could be offset by these passive losses, typically through depreciation. So a couple of years ago, it was 100% depreciation. So if I put 50 grand in a syndication, I may get a 45 grand loss or a 40 grand loss. So then I could sort of build that up. And if it was giving me, say, 5,000 or 6,000 a year cash flow, I could have 4 or 5 years before it was able to sell that I was kind of offsetting that income, but I was still getting income from it. And then if I then had a big hit at the end when the property did sell, then I could use what's called like a passive pairing type of situation, where I bought another property that gave me 100% depreciation in that year of sale of property one. And then I could offset that income to where you're kind of kicking the can down the road. And that's what allowed me to build up all these investments, because I wasn't using that cash flow either from the cash on cash or from the ending sort of sale to add to my income. I was just kind of letting it snowball and then investing in the other one. So that's what's been working for me to allow me to kind of kick up my passive income.
Yeah. Wow. That's great. Let's dive a little deeper into how you navigated the real estate space, because there's so many different flavors. And for people that listen to this podcast or other podcasts, they know there's so many different ways to skin the cat in this business. And there's so many different ways that you can get involved in it and all. And so I'm curious how you navigated that space and how it's evolved over the last few years of being in the space.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I appreciate it. So yeah, for me, when I first got out of training as a physician, I was focused on, what can I do to increase my like return on investment?
Mm.
So in terms of when I put money in, what can I do to kick that up, whether it be through stock investing, real estate investing? Even though I haven't been practicing that long, like these days, I'm much more focused on my return on time,
Mm.
much more cognizant. And I think everyone at some point in life gets to a point where they feel that way, that I'm much more cognizant of the time that I invest in something or how much it requires of my investment to before I partake in it. So even though, like I said, I thought about doing turnkey investments, and a lot of those, New Jersey's not the most desirable for some of these investments based on the tax situation and the rent control rules and landlord rules and things like that. Most of those I would have had to do out of state, which then would probably require a property manager. So I just felt like it was much more complicated for me to get in the active investing at that point in time. Now, say my wife wanted to go down to halftime and she wanted to manage our properties and I could qualify for a real estate professional. In that case, it may make sense to do that, but at the time, she didn't want to do that. So I had to look for things that really didn't require much more of my time other than the upfront due diligence. Now, granted, that upfront due diligence takes time. Like when you're first getting some of these syndication and passive investing sort of investment summaries or pitch decks, it's like 55 pages of all this colorful pictures, and you're trying to figure out like where's the important stuff, what's the acquisition fee, what's that. So in the past, that would have taken me maybe a couple hours. And what I did is, for that first year that I was educating myself, I sort of built my own Excel sheet just so I could have like checkpoints to where I wouldn't like I missed something obvious. And I used that to help myself during these investments as I would go through it. But even although that was sort of a checklist of sorts or a check and balance, it still took time to do that. And then, eventually, as I interacted with more physicians, both through my own hospital as well as through like real estate investing forums, and I mentioned this Excel sheet that I created, then about, I would say one day I was responding to a forum post and about the Excel sheet, and the next day I had like 150 private messages.
Thank God.
Or people asking me for my Excel sheet. So I was like, I have no problem sharing it, but I'm not taking responsibility. But I realized that when that happened, there was a need for something like this out there.
Sure. Yeah.
And sort of, so that sort of formed the sort of side business we have now, or now it's turned into more than that, but that a passive advantage to where we sort of curated these Excel sheets initially, and then grew to like 1,500 passive investors, most of those being accredited physicians, that were now building out software and tools to get that 2-3 hours that it would take to analyze an investment summary now in a more sort of expedited fashion. So using the help of AI and things like that. So that's really what allowed me to continue to invest in this space without having to like require too much more time, since that's really what I'm focused on now, like not allocating too much time to things that really aren't worth it.
Sure. No, that makes a lot of sense. Well, let's dive a little deeper into that and passive advantage and or is it passive advantage or what it's.
Yep.
That's okay. But okay. Yep. I wanted to make sure I got that right. Okay. So when somebody comes to that, what do they get, and how do they navigate that? And, what are some of those advantages there? Like you said, it's time, but then I also think too, it puts everything into one place so that you can easily analyze it. To your point, it's like when you're looking at a deck or you're looking at PPM docs, things could be all over the place and different, documents and all. And two, there's not necessarily a broad industry standard on how people present certain things. I mean, so some could look different over here versus somebody else's. So how does that work? What does it do? Because it sounds like a great resource for somebody who does this stuff.
Yeah, no, I appreciate the question. So in the Excel version, we had everyone knows the classic, like when you're looking at these passive investments, the classic sort of three big components are the sponsor, the market, and the deal.
Yeah.
The sponsor is always the biggest component. And the tricky part is there are ways to objectify the sponsor evaluation, like how many full cycle deals, are they focused on an asset class? Do they have experience in this asset class and things like that? But then there are things that you need to kind of do what we're doing, and you need to sit down and you need to chat with them over a phone call or Zoom call and really get a feel of that person and make sure they're on the same page. Make sure their risk sort of profile is similar to what yours is, and just make sure there's a fit there. Like when you make these passive investments, say it's like a 5, 7, 10-year hold, like it's kind of getting into like a relationship. So you want to make sure that the person you're dealing with is you're going to want to interact with, or if there is some rough roads and rough patches, and there will be more than likely that you're okay navigating that together. So that's one of the key components of it. And then, so in the prior Excel version, like I said, you would have that investment summary that was 50 or 60 pages, and then we would have to go through it and scroll up and down and do a Control F and try to find certain places, and then you can't find it. So then you have to email the sponsor. So
yeah,
it was still a valuable tool, but of those 1,500 investors, when we initially started, we kept getting emails about, can you have the sponsors fill these Excel forms out, or is there a way to make it less manual? So at that point in time, probably a little less than a year ago, we decided to pivot to the software build out. So we sort of reorganized the team, hired on a couple 10XN software engineers that had done this. They both were some of the starting engineers for DocuSign. So they're awesome engineers that can like make things happen pretty quickly. And now an investor basically takes an investment summary, the PDF that we all get, and just drops it into the software, to the app. And it answers probably like, we usually use in the multifamily space about 120 different metrics that we look at.
Wow.
And it answers like 80% of those just through the software. Now, obviously it's AI based. You do have to kind of cross check it a little bit.
Sure.
But it just, instead of taking me 2 to 3 hours, I could now get a snapshot of these deals in like 5 or 10 minutes. And then instead of having to then send emails to the sponsors as I run across different questions, within the software, you can literally hit a check mark to ask the sponsor on certain questions that it wasn't able to pick up or that you don't know.
Yeah.
And then it curates all those ask the sponsor questions, like say it's 5 questions.
Yeah.
And you can send, and it sends an automatic email to the sponsor to where they then get back to you to answer those questions. So we're trying to like start with value add. Like we feel like there's so many people in the space that, and nothing against anyone, that aren't adding a lot of value. Whereas we really start with the value add component of what we can do to make it easier. And then ultimately, like big picture, without getting too altruistic, is then make the space more approachable, because I see so many physicians that are overwhelmed with the information. They just sit on the sidelines because they feel like they can't wrap their head around it. So we want to make it more understandable, more simple, more save some time, but also, not overlook that education part of it, because you are investing your hard-earned money and you don't want to just blindly invest in somebody's deals. So we're trying to help the overall space to bring, because I remember I polled my hospital of 700 physicians how many have heard of real estate syndications. I think it was like 10 of the 700.
Are you kidding me?
And then how many haven't invested? It was like 2 other than me. So
oh my God.
You just see this the space, at least that, obviously I'm biased on the physician side because that's where I am, but it's completely untapped, and I feel like it's a value to people, especially as some of those docs get out. So we're trying to make it overall more approachable to get into.
It sounds like an amazing tool to do that, and like you said, if something can cut down on the time that you have to spend, that's incredibly helpful. And then too, like to kind of, so what to ask. I feel like a lot of times, people don't necessarily know what to ask. I like to do like open Q&As and webinars and things like that. So other investors can hear what other investors ask, because I feel like that's such a great resource, because it's just sometimes some investors are a little bit more advanced than others, been doing it longer. They were in the operation side, so they have a different perspective. And people always tell me how much they like that, because it's like, I would have never even known to ask that, or they don't even realize they can, or something like that. So, but that's unbelievable. That a 10 out of a 700, oh my God, I've been doing this so long. I just assume everybody knows it. Yeah.
I know.
You say something like,
That's the way I feel too. When I got those results, I'm like, is this right? Is everyone responding? And then it was just, yeah, it was unbelievable. So yeah, I think it's and like I said, I really want people to have the ability to kind of get some of this additional passive. I mean, listen, it's not without risk. There's a reason that there's sort of accredited investor verification and stuff like that. But yeah, as long as you know going in, and I think it also helps the sponsors from several components in that there are many sponsors and many people that were raising capital over these last couple of years when deals started to hit a little bit of a rough patch, that there was this false sense of responsibility that, like, now that that happened, that limited partners are like, well, I trusted you with my money, and you never told me this could happen, and blah, 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 where I feel like having a tool like this that points out the risk points, we do it in sort of a color-coded fashion, and that if there's parts of the deal that are higher risk, it may turn red, whereas other parts that are good, it may turn green. So it's clear as to what the risk factors of the deal are. It doesn't mean invest or not invest. You could then decide for yourself, but it allows some limited partners to have more eyes wide open going into these deals, so that if it does hit a rough patch, it's not as if you didn't realize there were some risks associated with. Because reality is, all these deals have risk. If it's especially the classic like value add, like if you want everything to be green and everything to be good, then stick with the treasury bond or or something like that's not. There's a risk premium to get this sort of return. You need to take on a little bit of risk, but I feel like that wasn't elucidated to some limited partners, and they had this false sense of like, it's your responsibility to take care of my money. Whereas something like this could have opened their eyes a little bit, so that it shielded sponsors to let them know, like, listen, this is the investor's responsibility too, to do some of their own education and due diligence, which in the past they were just throwing money at people and not really thinking about that. So I think it'll help the sponsors in that sense too, to add some awareness of that risk component of some of these deals.
yeah. No, I absolutely love that. And I'm I'm not a fan of surprises. Unless it's like a birthday surprise. It's something super fun, you know what I mean? But for the most part, I don't like surprises. So, and for something like that to kind of lay it out, put it all in one place at all, you mean that's beautiful. I love that. And I think you're so right. You mean, especially too, because if you don't go beyond that deck into the actual the deck's never going to have the risk disclosures and things. I don't think I've ever seen risk involved in a deck. I mean, and if it does, it's very watered down, and then it immediately provides, the way that they're, how they're mitigating them, that kind of thing. But the PPM, and normally like ours it's the starting, 20 pages. You know what I mean? It's I've seen other people, they have it in different parts, but a lot of times it's that first thing you see. And I've gotten those questions over the years where people ask me, like, well, what's the real risk? And it's like, everything in there is legitimate to some degree. Now, if you want to go through every one and kind of talk about how you mitigate it, and how, as the funds evolve and things like that, some of them are more set up from the beginning than they are, down the line. But it's like, every one of them has legitimacy. And I see some people tell me, like, well, I saw other offering docs where they only had a page or two of risk. Like, that seemed better or something. It's like, no, I want to see as many things as humanly possible. I always wonder, like, what securities attorney do they have? Because usually they're like, if it's even a half of a fraction, of a point, that could be a risk, they want that documented in there. You know what it sounds like to me, and I talk about this a lot on the podcast and with people. People need to have like somewhat of a life assessment before they get into this stuff. Would you agree with that? Because it's like, how do you know your risk, appetite and all that kind of stuff? Is there things that you've done there, and things that you recommend to, the people that you're helping and teaching and all that, with how they can kind of assess that, maybe some questions they can ask themselves, and it just seems like, it's like, how do you even know necessarily if you don't ask yourself, right?
Yeah, no, you're 100% right. And I reached that point myself. And I tell people straight out, like I get some fellows that are just graduating, starting as an attending year one, and I tell them right up front, this is not right for you right now.
Mm.
You need to do, you need to get all your other ducks in a row to where you can pretty much, you don't need this income. Like for me, and this is it, everyone's got a different definition. If somebody needs income from passive investing now,
Mhm.
they shouldn't be doing it.
Yeah, that's a great point.
That's the bottom line. Like you could, that sort of culminate for me, culminates all the accredited investor verification, net worth status, income. If you need this income that you're using from passive investing right now, then you shouldn't be doing it. And so, you just have to think about it that way. I mean, there are people who use it for the retirement income and things like that, but most of those people have some base of income that they can rely on.
Sure.
As they're using this to kind of keep it going, but it's not as if they need that month's investment from new investment to use that. So I use the same mantra with the new attending, and I say I wouldn't even consider this until you're at least 5 years out, getting all the other things, all the other ducks in a row, all the other setups. And the other thing is, I say, like, for everyone, this may not be right for everyone. You may just want to, if you're really conservative and you don't want to sort of embark on any of this risk sort of thing, you may want to just stick to the stock market and do it the old fashioned way, to where you're just investing, you do your pre-tax, you do your other stuff, and that'll get you there. Like, it's not like you can't get there if you do it the right way. You cut your expenses, make sure you're not inflating your lifestyle, all those like key parameters. But for those who want a little something extra, who want to maybe cut down the time to financial independence, I do think there's a value to it. But you just have to understand going in. And like, I've had plenty of people say to me, just because I've done so many investments, I'm teaching them, just tell me what you're investing in and I'll sort of invest alongside you. And that's, I'm like,
I'm sure you know it's always got to.
that's not the way for you. Yeah, like I'll point you. And this is part of the reason why we started Passive Advantage, because I kept getting those discussions and I said, I'll point you to these education materials. And then I didn't have like one consolidated place for the stuff that I liked or that I thought was important to point people. So by sort of making the edifying the Excel sheet, but also having like resources and web, like you do, we do our own webinars, and we have resources, free ebooks, so I could point people to the website, and then it saved me a lot of these conversations to where they can just go there, educate themselves. And I said, after you do some of that, then we'll come back, we'll talk about it, and then we'll figure it out. But I would never tell people like, invest in this. This is this is a good deal. I'm going to invest in this. So I really think everyone's got to learn it for themselves. Go into it with eyes wide open, and then you may then decide it's not right for you. But for a lot of people, I think it is. So yeah, you're 100% right. You need to reevaluate your own personal goals, personal risk profile, stuff like that. And it's tough. I mean, even with stock market investing, a lot of people are like, yeah, I'm high risk. And then the market crashes and they're like, they can't sleep for a week. I mean, so you got to know, like, it's not just real estate. Like any of these investments, nobody likes to lose money. You always have to realize that that's a part of these things, and that's where the returns come in.
Yeah, I love that. I think the know yourself mentality, what you like, your strengths, your weaknesses, all that kind of stuff. It's so important, and not just for this, but for everything in life. But I just think it's going to save a lot of stress down the line and all. And like you were saying before, it's not right for everybody. There's no reason to feel bad about that or anything. And when you do understand, well, I can't stomach this, that, or the other, it's going to keep me out. Then move on. I mean, it's like, then that gives you that freedom to go do something else. I mean, or focus on something else you want and all. Because we all, if you go to RIAs and things like that, we all know there's people who've been going for 20 years and they still haven't done anything. And it's like, move on. It's not right for you. You know what I mean? It's so there's nothing wrong with that. I think that's such an important thing, because sometimes when you get involved in these communities and the podcast and this kind of lifestyle, there's some people that bring that attitude to the thing where it's like, you got to do this, or if you're not doing it, you're a bum or something like that. And it's just like, that's not the case at all. Well, some of the ththings you said kind of led me to the next question I have for you was, so what do you like? Because I'm curious. And obviously it's I don't think you're not recommending anything or anything like that. We'll preface it by that, but what do you like? And then I'm curious to why, because I think. I see this a lot. There's, like we said, there's so many different ways to do the business, and multifamily, mobile home parks, single family lending, development, self storage. It's like, how do you know what to do? And if you had that life assessment, at least you know now what you want and what you need and where you're at, and then you kind of have to plug it in with an investment that will help you get there. Because I always see people where they're like, they want cash flow, or, they want to replace, they're looking for retirement, they want to replace, but then they're like, so I'm looking at this development deal, and it's like, that might not be the best avenue. Maybe lending, maybe on something on the debt side, or maybe like a stabilized core plus kind of a thing, or a triple net or something. So I'm curious. Maybe we can answer that question through a little bit of your what you like. So what do you like, and why right now?
Yeah, so I think over the last couple of years, and I've always tried to do this, and it's not easy because since many of these investments do have high minimums, unless you invest in like a big fund or a sort of combined fund of some sort, it's hard to get automatic diversification.
Yeah.
Without, spending time to invest in multiple deals. So I think the key over these last couple of years that I've been taught is the importance of diversification, because every asset class is different. So if you were all in on multifamily over these last couple of years, I would say since retail investing, sort of the inceptions during the Jobs Act of like 2012, it hasn't been hit by difficulty up until now over the last couple of years. So and I feel bad for a lot. There's a bunch of physicians that got into the space as the space started peaking in like 2021, 2020, 2022, where I'm sure you remember the times where deals would go out and like a day later it's fully subscribed.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, yeah, in retrospect, you look back and you're like, how did I not know that was like the froth of the market, like that it couldn't stay like that?
Yeah.
That's the reality of it. And that's when the peak of sort of interest, people were coming out of the woodwork and just like, oh, I want to invest in syndications. But, thankfully, I've had a number of deals prior to that, and then, starting in 2017. So, but there are some of these people I talked to that started investing in 2021. They may have 3, 4, 5 deals, and all of them have capital calls. Those people, unfortunately, I don't know. It's going to take a lot to bring those people back, and they're at like the peak of the limited partners, and so I feel like the space has been stunned. And granted, like, I'm not saying all these sponsors were bad. Like, nobody could have anticipated the rise in interest rates and the way that it worked. And sort of around like 2018, 19 is when you started to see more and more of these variable rate deals, interest rate deals from as far as the debt structure goes, which obviously there's a risk component. You're taking on the interest rate risk, which came back to bite people. But, when you saw that start to kick in, like thankfully, I probably, of my portfolio, about 60% is in multifamily. The other 40% is diversified. Some of the other things you mentioned, mobile home parks, self-storage. I have a couple of triple net, like industrial type stuff. And then, so I diversified across these things, and that diversification has allowed me to weather some of that storm. Now, I'm the 60% multifamily. Only 3 of those deals were variable rate debt. So two of them have paused distributions. One did have a capital call, unfortunately. But of my whole portfolio, I mean, it's not as bad as someone who's invested in 5 deals and they're all capital calls. Sure. So that's sort of a microcosm of this diversification importance that I'm talking about, that you need to kind of build up a portfolio. If you want to be a passive investor and you want to sort of weather some of these storms, there's no other way to do it, in my opinion, because who would have predicted these interest rate hikes, or who would have predicted COVID? Like, it's just, or, God forbid, if a hurricane comes to a property or a tornado, like, these things happen that you can't predict. And I think the only way to mitigate that is through the diversification component of it. So I'm continuing to try to diversify. Like, I have paused a lot of my multifamily investments at this point in time. I do there's the most recent deal I invested in was a fixed rate assumption deal where they assume instead of a prior owner that there was a good value add thesis there. And the second most recent deal was sort of a tax abatement component to where sort of that mitigated some of the risk to where they were able to sort of control the property taxes and have some steady renters in there. But of the typical value add with bridge debt, like that's not where I'm looking right now. Although one could argue, if you really wanted that perspective, that now is a better time for bridge debt than it was a couple years ago. But it's going to be hard to lure some passive investors to bridge debt deals right now. And then I continue to invest in some of these other spaces, the industrial space and things like that. I really like right now as well. So, yeah, I just look for good opportunities. But I do think over the next couple of years there will be some really good opportunities as rates start to come down. I mean, even now, I think there's starting to be some really good opportunities but it's just you just have to be ready for it to be able to pounce on it. And hopefully some of the tools, some of the education materials that we have allow people to be able to quickly assess those things in that arena.
Yeah, I love that. This is an evolving business, and I think a lot of times LPs want to kind of hope that it's like McDonald's, and you're just flipping hamburgers, But even when you look at McDonald's, right, they added breakfast on at some point, they added chicken sandwiches on at some point. They've tried pizza at all guy over the year, so it's just like it's an evolving business. And like, to go back to that life assessment thing, it's like you got to reassess too, because to your point, it's like the market the way it was a few years ago isn't how it is today, isn't how it's going to be next year, and there's always going to be things that happen from a macro perspective, all the way down to the micro perspective too, to where you're investing, that kind of thing. I'm curious, where do you find deals? Where like, do they do they find you? I feel like sometimes, especially you're out there, you're doing podcasts and stuff. So they probably find you more so than anything. But for somebody who's new, who wants to maybe start to analyze things and stuff like that, where do you find them? Any advice there?
Yeah, so I mean, there's definitely when we were in that peak of time in like 21, 22, like I'm sure like sponsors were coming out of the woodwork. Like, hey, Aunt Sally was a real estate sponsor raising capital for deals. So it's thinned out. I mean, over the last sort of year and a half. So in the beginning, like I'm pretty active in some of these real estate forums, like there's a couple private real estate forums that we discuss sponsors, and some new ones that I don't know of. I may say, this is interesting. I'll reach out to them personally there. Bigger Pockets has had a lot of discussion of sponsors at that point in time, to where you can get exposure, reach out to them, have a conversation. Listening to podcasts like yours when sponsors are on there, and I hear someone and I like their thesis, I like what they're talking about. It may then prompt me to send an email and get on. And then once they have a conversation, if you like it, you get on their investor list, you start getting deals. So over that sort of combination of variables, and just have one, now that I have a lot of passive investor friends of mine that, we just talk about it, and next thing you know, you're reaching out to that sponsor and getting on their list. So I would say the combination of all of those things. Now I'm getting, it's definitely, the flow is not like what it was, but I'm still getting, probably 5 to 7 deals a week, even now when time is kind of slow. But back then, when it was at its peak, you were getting 20, 30 deals a week.
Or 5 to 7 a day
all the time. But yeah, that's sort of how you do it. A lot of it's word of mouth. Some of it is being active in some of these places that passive investors live, whether it be forums or and then also listening to some podcasts and things like that certainly help out.
Awesome. Well, Sam, this has been an amazing conversation. I've really enjoyed talking to you. For people that want to learn more about what you do and get involved in Passive Advantage and all, how can they find out more?
No, I appreciate that, and I appreciate you having me on, Peter. It's been a great conversation. So you can just go to passiveadvantage.com. We have free resources there, free ebooks, free webinars. You can watch some of our recorded webinars. And then, as far as the deal analyzer go, you have 2 free deals if you sign up and you have an investment summary that you want to try out. You just kind of pop in the investment summary, see what it does and what you think of it. And we're always looking for feedback, to send us some feedback. The sort of main email is info@passiveadvantage.com. Or you can reach out to me personally, sam@passiveadvantage.com. But yeah, we're just trying to help educate, and soon we're in the process of developing a marketplace to where instead of investors or limited partners having to sort of confirm some of this data that was answered through AI, then we'll have the sponsors who place deals on the marketplace confirm that themselves.
Yeah.
So that limited partners could literally look at the data. It's already been sponsor verified, and you don't have to. It's all about like continuing taking out that manual component. I mean, exactly everything as easy as possible. So we think that'll be a huge value add for limited partners as well once that marketplace is launched.
Definitely. That's amazing. I love it. Well, Sam, thank you so much for being here. This has been a great conversation. I appreciate you coming on.
But thanks for having me. Anytime.